couple of things have become apparent to me over the past day. First of all, that was a very, very, very good Nintendo Direct. Second of all, the people complaining online are a very vocal minority. Now, watching this, I knew that people would be complaining about this. I knew they would be upset. But what really surprised me was why they were upset. Because I went into this thinking that people would be complaining about the amount of third-party games, the amount of time that Nintendo spent on stuff that has already been announced. And to a certain extent, that has been true, but what we're seeing out of the community right now is that you're seeing a bunch of people desperately flailing around, trying to tell you that there's no reason to buy this console, that it has no games, that there's nothing to look forward to. And then meanwhile, in reality, I'm picking up Star Fox, I'm picking up Grand Blue, I'm picking up like Rhythm Heaven, I'm picking up Splatoon Raiders, like Fire Emblem looks great. Like, again, they showed off a lot of really good looking games at this Direct. And one of the things I pointed out in my last video was that plenty of games for this console have been announced at Summer's Game Fest and other showings that had nothing to do with this Direct. So I felt that complaining about the Direct in and of itself was not reasonable because plenty of announcements have been made for this console outside of the Nintendo Direct. And I feel like that's very important considering that what we're actually talking about here is the games themselves and the actual release schedule. What this all looks like to me is that the community is very, very desperate to keep the narrative around Nintendo negative. They're going to extreme lengths to try and gaslight you into thinking nothing is coming out, that nothing has been announced, that Nintendo is not doing a good job of selling people on their console, when that very obviously is not true. And what we're seeing now is a pretty good example of that, in which we're seeing a lot of major announcements get brushed under the rug for pretty petty reasons. For example, Onimusha got announced during this Nintendo Direct, and the narrative was that, like, well, we've already seen that game. No, we haven't actually. This has not been confirmed for Nintendo Switch, and it's launching day and date with the other versions. This was objectively a major announcement. But because this was also shown off in the PlayStation Showcase, because this has already been seen before on other consoles, there was this weird narrative that somehow it didn't count as a notable release on Nintendo Switch 2. Like, the narrative right now is that third-party games are not relevant on Nintendo consoles because gamers are just automatically going to play them on other platforms. And that is hilariously wrong, okay? It really does need to be expressed going forward that this line of thinking is just not true. It's not going to happen. It's completely out of touch. You don't know what you're talking about. So this leads into my point about the reception to the Nintendo Direct, in which a lot of people in the community gaslit themselves into thinking this was going to be like a big showcase, that Nintendo was definitely going to show a ton of first-party announcements, that there wasn't going to be a lot of third-party presence. Like, the term General Nintendo Direct was thrown around a lot the past couple of months, and it seems as if the community had this idea that meant that Nintendo would focus on like a number of like first party exclusive announcements. But when that didn't happen, a lot of people got upset and irritated at the fact that they didn't have any major Nintendo games to grift off of. And that's actually why so many people are upset. When you look at like Nintendo Land, when you look at people like Demish, like what ends up happening is that these people really are upset at the fact that we're not getting like a new 3D Mario. They may try and deny it. They may try and head you off. I know Nintendo Land tries to tell people that like, oh no, I totally play RPGs, bro. But the simple fact of the matter is that every time we get a direct like this, every time we don't get 3D Mario announced, we get a lot of bitching from this community. It's gotten to the point where I'm very comfortable coming out and saying that these people need to play more games. We just got Donkey Kong Bonanza last year. I am perfectly fine waiting another 5-10 years for another 3D Mario. I don't necessarily want them to pump it out for no reason, essentially. Like, I would want it to be good. I don't want them to, like, try and milk it. And that's the mindset we should all have, okay? Like, people think 3D Mario should be pumped out like Disney-era Star Wars or something, and what happened? The brand diluted. They went from having one of the most successful film releases of all time with Star Wars The Force Awakens to getting outperformed by Obsession, okay? Like, the simple fact of the matter is Nintendo fans need to start playing games that aren't made by Nintendo. Some of the best experiences I've had on Switch 2 so far are coming from games that were not made by Nintendo. Street Fighter 6 is my most played game on the console right now. I started playing Disgaea 4, last night. I'm playing like a bunch of Tales games, for example. Like, again, like Yeast is a big thing. I want to get into Trails, right? I'm playing a bunch of games on my Nintendo Switch 2 that are made by Nintendo. And usually what happens when I bring this up is that people try and like insist that they can play these games on other platforms, or that they run better on other platforms, or that they don't like these games, they don't want to play like older games, because a lot of these games are older ports. And it's just, if a game is available on Switch 2, that makes it a Switch 2 game. Okay, that's something that I think we do have to beat in to these people's heads, because whenever it comes to these kind of things, like, you see all manner of excuses like thrown at why people don't want to support them. Like this idea that they're older games, the idea that they're RPGs, the idea that they're like they have an anime aesthetic, or the idea that like I can play these games on other consoles. So like, again, you basically have a lot of people coming out speaking out about these games, but it all comes down to the same thing. This idea that these aren't relevant titles on Nintendo consoles because they're third-party games, even if they are very popular, very successful games in their own right. It took a while for me to kind of process what was going on, because I think most genuine Nintendo fans were pretty enthusiastic about all the games shown. Like, I'm seeing a lot of people give surprisingly glowing reviews to this Nintendo Direct, but I think what's happening is that there is a subsection of Nintendo fans that, for whatever reason, refuse to play anything that isn't a mainline Mario or Zelda game. Because that was the narrative going into this, okay? Is that, we need a new Mario or Zelda to sell people on this console. And first of all, we got that with the Ocarina of Time remake, but the other side of that coin is that whenever it comes to something that's more obscure, if it's something like Xenoblade or Fire Emblem, if it's like any of these third-party games, like the immediate response to like these kinds of people is to say that Nintendo has lost their way, they don't know what they're doing, they're not doing enough for their fans, and it's really, really odd, the kind of hyperbolic nonsense I've been seeing online. I've seen people say that Nintendo's future is in jeopardy. I've been seeing people say that like this console is going to be worse than the Wii U. Like I've seen so many people come out with these like insane hot takes. These insane hot takes, and you just can't take it seriously. For example, we're constantly being told that the Switch 2 hasn't done enough to justify itself, that it doesn't have enough games on the market, that there aren't any system sellers on it. And the simple fact of the matter is Mario Kart World is the system seller. And the justification that these people have is this idea that, like, well, Mario Kart World isn't good enough. It's an $80 game. They haven't given it any free updates. And, like, none of that really matters, okay? This is a game people will put hundreds of hours into. Okay. This is one of the best games on the console. Whatever nitpicks you might have with it, it is objectively a good game. And that's kind of my mindset when I look at people like freaking out over events like this. You're having people call this the worst direct ever, and you're having people question the future of Nintendo, and yet they're completely neglecting to mention the simple fact that we've been having directs regularly all year long. You know, we got the Star Fox Direct, we got the Tamagotchi Life Direct, we got the partner showcases. Okay. Like, the simple fact of the matter is this was not a particularly big event. The reality of the situation is that Nintendo can drop major announcements at any time and have them be successful. And this direct was successful, no matter what people tell you. Like, people tuned in and watched this thing. You know, people are engaged with the Switch 2. They're hyped for it. They want to learn about new games for it. And a lot of people came away from this thinking that a lot of the stuff shown was really, really good. What you're seeing out of the community right now is a bunch of people complaining about not getting quote unquote hype announcements. And that's really all it boils down to. Because when you look at what people are saying, they do things like, oh, well, we already knew about those games, or that's a third party game that was shown in another presentation. And they're not really addressing the elephant in the room. Like, is the game good? And are people going to buy it on Switch? Like, yes, Kingdom Hearts 4 is going to do numbers on Switch. Yes, Onimusha is going to do numbers on Switch. Like, these games are going to do very, very well for the console. And what's more, and this has been a common occurrence on the Switch too, is that people seem to radically underestimate how well certain franchises do. Like, a notorious example of this is Pokemon Pokopia, which came out, was a huge success, sold a bunch of units, and has been a huge draw for Switch 2 owners this year, okay? But looking at this direct, one of the things that really surprised me was that Nintendo Switch Sports Resort got announced. And immediately, people came out and they started doing the same thing they did last time, where they're just like, this game looks like slop, it looks basic, it looks ridiculous, no one's going to buy this. And then in reality, Nintendo Switch Sports, the original, sold like 18.5 million units. Okay, 18.5. One of the best-selling games on the console. And you have, like, analysts and stuff like that who will come out and tell you that, like, well, actually, that was just because of Switch hype, and the sequel isn't going to do nearly as well. Like, this game was really badly received, but, like, that's not true. Like, the game was extremely popular. You know, I love Nintendo Switch Sports. I'd go so far as to say it's one of my favorite games on the console. So the fact of the matter is, Nintendo Switch Sports Resort is a major announcement that's probably going to do upwards of like 20 million units, right? It's going to be a huge success. Like, this game clearly has an audience, but much like Pokopia and Tamagotchi Life before it, the narrative is that it's not going to do that well, that it's not a major game, it's not a major release, and it's not going to sell units. And that could not be farther from the truth. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, in which you have people spurging out over the JRPGs. You know, I know people are like, well, are trying to tell you that, like, well, no Fire Emblem has ever performed more than 3 million units. Which is not an argument that works, considering Fire Emblem fans are the kind of people who will put a lot of money into their brand. You know, a lot of people were surprised that Fortune's Weave is being sold at $80, but the simple fact of the matter is Fire Emblem is one of those games that Nintendo can sell at a premium because it's so popular and because people will put hundreds of hours into it. Okay, a lot of people are trying to tell you that they're not going to pay for this game at full price, and I can guarantee you that's not going to be the case for the vast majority of the player base. We were told by these Nintendo YouTubers that nothing major was announced, that there are no games coming out on this console, that this Direct was a complete disappointment, and yet when you look at at the actual release schedule, what you get is actual peak. Star Fox in June, we're getting Splatoon Raiders in July, we're getting Onimusha and Fire Emblem in September. October is Nintendo Switch Sports Resort, and eventually we'll get more information on the Dusk Bloods and Ocarina of Time remake. Okay. Like, the next 3 months are pretty well accounted for. I'm buying several games in the next coming months. So, like, I find it very difficult to believe people when they come out and they try and tell you that there's nothing to play, because inevitably what they mean by that is that there are no 3D Mario or original Zelda games in the foreseeable future. And I think we need to do a couple of things in response to this. Like, first of all, we do need to call them out on this. Like, we need to stop beating around the bush and start addressing the reality of the situation, in that there are other games on Nintendo platforms than Mario and Zelda. This isn't even really about the third-party thing, because this applies to like a wide range of series that really should have a lot of overlap with other Nintendo games, right? We just got Donkey Kong Bonanza, for example. So why exactly is everyone getting uppity about 3D Mario in particular? It doesn't really make any sense. You're telling me that a game set in the Mario universe, starring Donkey Kong, that doesn't have Mario in it, that's made by the Mario Odyssey team, you're telling me that doesn't appeal to you as a Mario fan? It's like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's something that we do absolutely have to call out more often. Secondly, don't let them try and gaslight you into thinking they're huge fans of these other Nintendo franchises. Because I've seen Nintendo Land do this a couple of times, where like he bought a copy of like every Xenoblade and Fire Emblem game to show on stream, to pretend that he's like a huge fan, so that he can like openly bitch about these directs when they happen. Okay. Like, I've seen people do that. I've seen people pretend to like have an investment in Xenoblade and Fire Emblem in order to try and like push this narrative that even Xenoblade and Fire Emblem games are sick of all the releases, and what they really want is just another 3D Mario. Don't take it seriously. Okay. Don't let these people try and masquerade as real fans and try and like pretend to be like jaded by what Nintendo is doing. It's just, they need to be called out on it. They can't be allowed to control the narrative as to what's happening with the company right now. And that's the really interesting thing, because immediately after the Nintendo Direct, what we saw from like the stay-at-home community and like the unemployed people and like the bums was that this was the worst Nintendo Direct of all time. Okay, everybody was saying that immediately. Is that everyone said this was awful, that they hated it, that nothing good was shown, and then over the next day, after people got home from work and could actually watch it, then we started seeing the narrative shift. Then you started seeing people say that like, actually, I really liked it. You started seeing people acknowledge like all the games they were excited for and how the Direct was actually really good. And we've seen over the past day just how many people are coping and seething about how normie audiences don't really agree with them. Because normie audiences are not tuning into every Nintendo showcase and like evaluating them as if they were like major E3 presentations. There have been a lot of Nintendo YouTubers that have spent the past day complaining about this Nintendo Direct, but conversely, there have been a surprising amount that have been like very supportive of it. Arlo came out and said it was good. I know Max Dude came out and said it was good. Like, again, there are like a lot of the usual suspects that will complain and bitch and moan no matter what, but like, I think it's safe to say that the Direct was a success. And we really do need to move past this idea that like directs should be about the hype and not about like selling people on actual video games, because I feel like that's a very bad mindset for the fan base to be in. You know how I spent my 1-year anniversary with Nintendo Switch 2? I was playing Mario Kart World. I was playing Kirby Air Riders. I was playing the games that have already come out on this thing. And no amount of these people trying to gaslight me into thinking that like, well, actually, I'm done with those games and I'm finished them. Like, you're basically just admitting that you don't play these games to begin with. If you try and do that, like, it really doesn't make any sense considering how much content there is in these games and how much there is to do. I just find myself very, very confused at how so many people are so desperate to push this idea that this console has no games. Like, you have been exposed time and time again, and I hope this is the last time that you can get away with your nonsense.